rundown of the Channel 7 news that came out of Dorcas Street for many years. On a balmy night in November 1956, thousands of people gathered in front of shop windows throughout Melbourne. They were watching and waiting to step into the unknown, the first broadcast of the exciting new medium called television. A couple of weeks back, Channel 7 opened its archives and brought out some of the great photos, and their Hall of Fame was established in the Dorcas Street studios, and a man very prominent in those days and in the photos, Dan Webb. Good evening.
Hello, Bruce. How lovely to talk to you.
And of course, Dan, proudly you were part of the opening night ceremony as well.
Yes, I was, Philip.
Tell us about...
New Year to you.
Thank you very much. Tell us about that opening night, Dan, of 7.
Well, I remember it was a very nerve-wracking experience. And there was a man called Jimmy Upshaw who had gone to a lot of trouble to prepare an opening ballet with the Channel 7 ballet, which they had in those days. They had a very involved sequence of fish in a huge fish tank, and they were going to dissolve through to a little goldfish tank. And we were all standing by under the hot lights for so long that the fish carked it. And they all started floating upside down in the tank.
Of course, you'd come from where? 3DB, Dan?
3DB, yes.
And so you're a novice to television, as was Eric Pearce and everyone else.
Well, yes, I had put in some months of my pay to buy 2 American books on television by Brett and Stashef, I remember the names. They were the experts in those days, so I thought I knew quite a lot about television.
And you were employed as an announcer, Dan?
I was well, I don't know what I was employed. I was employed as a sort of I suppose what you call today a presenter. If you look, did you see the picture of the front page of the Listener Inn? There was Mary Parker, who was well established, was well known on the BBC in television. She was brought back to Melbourne. She was wonderful.
She was your weather girl, wasn't she, first up?
Oh, yes, but you couldn't. I mean, she was much more than a weather girl. She was an identity. She had a program of her own. She used to work with Isidore Goodman. I have to remind you. You mentioned the news right at the start. News services in those early days, people will not believe me when I tell them this today, they were only 10 minutes long, and there were no television journalists. Because all they relied on was film, and as much local film as they could get. Gordon Bennett was one of those who shot film, and he's now up at the top of the world in the sporting business in television at Channel 7. But they lasted 10 minutes. They had to bring the film, remember, from overseas by propeller-driven aircraft, so it used to take 3 or 4 days to reach here. And very often it was a question of the man who collected the film out at Essendon Airport, because Tullamarine wasn't built, having to take a few dollars in his pounds in his pocket, because it was necessary to flash notes in front of customs officials who wanted to hold up the film to inspect it, and it hadn't even been processed in England.
Of course, speaking of pounds, what was your first wage at Channel 7, Dan, if we can ask you that?
£15 a week at $30.
So getting back to the news, it would be mainly all live, wouldn't it?
No. Eric Pearce was the newsreader in those days.
Yeah.
And he read local items.
Yes.
Usually taken straight from the Herald.
Right.
Which has been part of the course, because we've been doing that at 3DB for years. There were no news journalists at 3DB ever. The news was written straight from the Herald and read by Jeff McComas, Eric Pearce, Maury Kellard, all those famous names. But there was little bits of film, and Mike Brayshaw, I think, was the man who used to chop the film up and decide how long an item could go for. But it took a long time to get here, and very often the story had been well and truly done over in the press before it was ever seen on television.
Well, of course, you go into the annals of history with your afternoon game show.
Yes.
You took over Video Village, didn't you, from Chris Christensen?
I had Fun with Charades was the first one.
Oh, yes, that was your first, yes.
Yes, That's My Desire was the second one.
Then Jeff Raymond was doing Noughts and Crosses quiz.
Sponsored by Floor Coverings Proprietary Limited.
Yes, and I had Tell the Truth, the first 2 or 3 editions of Tell the Truth, and then Mike Williamson came in and took over Tell the Truth. But you see, there was nothing for me to do. I joined hoping to be a journalist on the road. But there was no room for a journalist in those days. All the news was actually prepared in the newsroom, and the cameramen were really the only journalists there were.
And the news stories were very padded out, I remember, Dan. There'd be some theme music behind each film story.
Yes.
There was no videotape in those days.
Music was...
You know, the opening of a flower show would run about 3 minutes.
Yes, and Government House was a very popular spot. You know those garden parties they used to have at Government House?
Yes, for the Red Cross, yes.
I remember going up there with Gordon Bennett once, and he got a spectacular bit of film of an old bird with a big plate full of cream buns sneaking out the back entrance of the marquee.
Oh.
He got it all on, but they couldn't run it, of course.
What was the rivalry like between, say, GTV9 and HSV in those early competitive days, Dan?
Well, it was intense. As you know, Eric Pearce stayed with Channel 7 for a year and then left and went to Channel 9. Channel 9 had Graham Kennedy, and Channel 7 introduced Bert Newton to compete with Graham Kennedy, and Bert Newton was very soon wooed away from Channel 7 over to Channel 9.
As was Brian Naylor later.
Well, Brian Naylor left because he couldn't get a car park, so I'm told. They refused to give him a car park, and it was so expensive to park in the streets of South Melbourne. It's more expensive now, I suppose.
Still pretty expensive.
Yes. So poor old Brian, this is what I understand. There was an argument over a car park space, which he believed should be allotted to the newsreader.
Dan, you had a look of Errol Flynn about you in those early days.
Very kind.
Was that
because I had a little moustache?
Yes, and you'd come from the IAAF, hadn't you?
Yes, I had.
And you were Danny Webb in those days.
I was too, yes.
Were you wooed across to another station? Were you ever tempted to go across to 9 or elsewhere?
No. No, I always... see, I'd started with the Herald at 3DB, and I admired their honesty. They were very loyal to people who worked for them. I saw that with Monty Blandford, who many of the older listeners to your program would remember. Monty Blandford retired, took his pittance of superannuation, wasn't much in those days, and invested it unwisely and lost the lot. And the Herald gave him a job on Sunday mornings so that he had a little bit of income.
He did the Philosopher's Scrapbook, I think.
He did, every Sunday morning. But the Herald were very good employers, but not lavish payers.
So, Dan Webb, did you keep working for 3DB in the early days when you were with Channel 7?
Oh, no.
There was either one or the other, was it?
It had to be a clean break. Al Potter and I both